There's a button on most microwaves that almost nobody uses for its intended purpose. It's the 30 seconds button, or sometimes it says add 30. And technically, it exists so you can add incremental time to food that's already running. That's what the manual says. That's what the engineers designed it for. But almost everyone just hits it once, immediately, as the entire cooking method. 30 seconds? Done. Because it works, because it heats the coffee, because life is short and the soup is cold and nobody has time to type in 1 o'clock like some kind of microwave purist. The engineers designed an increment button. The rest of us designed a primary cooking interface. And the microwave doesn't care. It just runs. That's the thing about a surprising amount of the stuff around you. It doesn't work the way it was supposed to work. It works the way people started using it, which turned out to be completely different. And at some point, everyone quietly agreed to pretend that was always the plan. The original design is still there, technically. The intended use case exists somewhere in a product brief from 1987. But the actual function, the reason you use the thing, that happened by accident. Not by accident like a mistake, by accident like nobody predicted it, nobody designed for it, and it became load-bearing anyway. This is going to change how you look at a lot of things you've been walking past your whole life. Let's start with something you touched today, the @ symbol. You've used it approximately 10,000 times this year. It's on every email address, every social media handle, every time you need to tag someone in a comment to make sure they see the passive-aggressive thing you're about to say. It feels like it was invented for the internet. It feels designed for exactly this purpose. It was not. The @ symbol is ancient, like genuinely old. The oldest confirmed use of it that historians have found is from a Bulgarian merchant in 1345, where it showed up in a manuscript as a shorthand for a unit of measurement. For a long time, it was just a commercial abbreviation. It showed up on typewriter keyboards in the late 1800s because merchants used it constantly in invoices. It basically meant at the rate of, as in 10 apples at 5 cents each. That's it. That's the whole job. Invoice shorthand. By the time computers rolled around, the @ was so boring and so useless in the digital context that it was basically stranded on keyboards everywhere, taking up space, having an identity crisis. When the engineers building early email systems needed a symbol to separate a person's name from the server location, this person, at this machine, Ray Tomlinson just grabbed the most meaningless symbol on the keyboard, the one that wasn't being used for anything else, the one that was just sitting there. He picked @ almost because it didn't mean anything yet, and now it's the symbol that organizes half of human communication. It's on storefronts. It's in legislation. There is a generation of people who learned to write their own name with it. The symbol that meant 10 apples at 5 cents is now how you exist on the internet. Nobody planned that. It just got picked up. Here's a weirder one. You know that little strip of blue at the top of a Word document, or the top of any desktop window, where the app name sits? The title bar. The thing that says Document 1, or Untitled, or, if you have 17 tabs open, a string of letters that used to be words before they got cut off. You probably drag it sometimes to move the window around. You probably don't think about it ever. The title bar was not designed to be a drag handle. That was a side effect. The original purpose of the title bar was just to label the window, to tell you what application you were looking at, which mattered more in the early days of desktop computing when the interfaces were sparse and confusing and everything looked the same. It was a label, a sign, like the name of a shop above the door. At some point, someone noticed that if you clicked on the label and dragged it, the window moved. Because of course it did. The label was attached to the window, and the window could be repositioned. That wasn't a feature. That was just physics, applied to a rectangle. But users started doing it constantly. It became the primary way to interact with Windows. The label became the handle. The sign above the shop became the front door. Now it's so standard that the title bar as drag handle thing is a UI design principle, written into interaction guidelines, taught in design courses. The accidental behavior is now doctrine. This happens constantly in software. The history of technology is mostly a story of engineers building one thing, users doing something slightly different with it, and engineers going back and pretending they meant that all along. SMS text messages are the most embarrassing example of this. The SMS standard was built in the 1980s as part of the GSM mobile network specification. It was designed to let engineers send small technical alerts to phones, diagnostic messages, network status updates, maintenance pings, the kind of thing only a network technician would care about. The character limit of 160 characters wasn't a poetic constraint chosen to encourage brevity. It was a technical ceiling based on the maximum size of a signaling packet on the network at the time. They chose 160 characters because that was roughly how long a technical service message needed to be. The engineers who built SMS explicitly did not think regular people would use it. Why would you? You had a phone. You could call someone. Calling was the whole point. SMS was the back channel, the utility pipe. The first person-to-person text message was sent in 1992. It said Merry Christmas. And for years after that, adoption was slow because the carriers mostly didn't bother to enable it, and phones didn't make it easy. And again, you had a phone. You could just call. And then teenagers got involved. Specifically, teenagers in Europe, in the late 90s, who had pay-as-you-go plans where calling cost real money, but texts were cheap or sometimes free because the carriers hadn't figured out how to monetize them yet. So the teenagers texted constantly, in the finger-breaking, T9 autocorrect fighting, physically painful way that required pressing the number 7 4 times to get the letter S. They built an entire communication culture on top of what was supposed to be a network maintenance tool. By the time carriers noticed and started charging for texts, it was too late. The behavior was load-bearing. They could charge for it precisely because it had already become essential, not because anyone planned it that way, but because the price gap got exploited by people who wanted to talk without it costing them. The 160-character limit that shaped a generation of communication, the one Twitter originally took as inspiration for its own character limit, the constraint that literally changed how people write to each other, that wasn't a design philosophy. It was the size of a maintenance packet. Okay, let's go somewhere more physical. The highway median. The grassy strip or concrete barrier running down the middle of divided highways. If you've ever driven on a long highway and found yourself staring at it for 30 seconds while your podcast loads, you might have briefly wondered who decided the highway needed a lawn. The answer is more interesting than you'd expect, because the median as we know it wasn't originally designed for safety. The earliest highway medians were designed to prevent headlight glare, the blinding sweep of oncoming headlights that made night driving genuinely dangerous before modern shielded beams. A physical separation with some width to it would break the line of sight. That was the engineering logic. The safety function, the way medians prevent head-on collisions, catch vehicles that drift, provide a recovery zone, that emerged from the existence of the median, not from its original intent. Engineers noticed the crash data. Researchers started studying the effect. The safety rationale got retrofitted onto a feature that was built to deal with headlights. Modern highway design does now intentionally engineer medians for safety. The width, the slope, the cable barriers in the middle, that's deliberate. But the thing that made medians standard in the first place, the reason every divided highway has one, that started somewhere else entirely. This is actually a pattern worth naming. A lot of the things that become standard in design get standardized because they turned out to work, not because they were planned to work. The accidental function gets studied, quantified, and then written into the next specification as an intentional feature. The accident becomes the rule, which means that somewhere, right now, there's an accidental use of something that hasn't been written into the specification yet. Someone is doing the wrong thing with a product or a system, and it's working better than the right thing, and nobody's noticed it enough to make it official. This is also the entire history of medicine, but that's a longer video. Let's talk about something you're probably doing right now, or did this morning: scrolling. Specifically, the pull to refresh gesture, where you grab the top of your feed, drag it down, let go, and the little spinner appears and the new posts load. You've done this thousands of times. It feels native. It feels like it was always there. It was invented by one guy, in 2008, for a Twitter client called Tweety. His name is Lauren Brichter, and he has said in interviews that he came up with pull to refresh because he needed somewhere to put the refresh button that wasn't cluttering the interface. The gesture was a solution to a layout problem. He patented it, Twitter acquired Tweety and got the patent with it, eventually released the patent into the open source world, and now every feed on every app on every phone uses this gesture. But here's what happened that nobody designed for. The gesture became compulsive. There's a behavioral researcher named Tristan Harris. You may have seen him show up in documentaries about tech, who pointed out that pull to refresh is essentially a slot machine. You pull the lever, you wait, you get a reward that's unpredictable. Sometimes it's new content, sometimes it's nothing. And that variable reward schedule is exactly the mechanism that makes slot machines so hard to walk away from. The intermittent payoff is more compelling than the consistent one. Brichter designed a layout solution. He did not design a behavioral loop that would get baked into every social media product in the world and contribute to the psychological mechanics that keep people scrolling at 1 a.m. when they have work in 6 hours. That happened because the gesture got adopted everywhere. And once it was everywhere, the variable reward thing kicked in at scale. And now it's one of the more studied interaction patterns in the psychology of technology. A layout fix. That became a compulsion engine. Nobody meant for that. Though at this point, nobody's rushing to change it either. There's a softer version of this pattern in the physical world that I find kind of beautiful, actually. Desire paths. Have you ever noticed, in a park or a college campus or a wide open area between two buildings, that there's often a worn strip of dirt cutting across the grass at a diagonal? Not a paved path, just a track where the grass gave up, where thousands of feet went the same direction so many times that the ground just accepted it. That's a desire path. The path people actually want to take versus the path the landscape architect drew. Some cities and universities have started designing around this intentionally. They'll build a space, leave it unpaved, wait a year, see where the desire paths form, and then pave those. Let the actual human movement patterns design the walkways instead of guessing in advance. The accidental path becomes the planned one. There's a version of this that shows up in how cities develop more broadly. The financial districts that formed along rivers or harbors, not because a planner said commerce goes here, but because the people moving goods needed to be near the water, and the infrastructure followed the people, and the character of a neighborhood calcified around a function that was originally just convenient. You can watch this happen in real time in any city that's growing fast. A neighborhood becomes the arts district, not because anyone designated it that way, but because the cheap rent attracted the studios attracted the galleries attracted the restaurants that artists like, the restaurants attracted the people who want to be around that, and now it's a brand on a tourism website. The character emerged from conditions, not from a plan. And once it's a brand, the conditions change. The rent goes up, the artists leave, the thing that made the thing happen is gone. But that's a different video. What's interesting about desire paths specifically is that they reveal a gap between what designers think people want and what people actually do. And that gap is often more useful than the design itself. The worn diagonal across the grass is data. It's the ground telling you where people want to go. A lot of good design is actually just being smart about where the desire paths already are. Bubble wrap. You knew I was going to get here. Bubble wrap is the internet's favorite example of accidental invention, and the story is real, and it's delightful. Two engineers, Alfred Fielding and Mark Chavan, were trying to make textured wallpaper in 1957. They sealed two shower curtains together, trapping air bubbles between them, and thought they had something interesting on their hands aesthetically. They tried to sell it as wallpaper. Nobody bought it. They tried to sell it as greenhouse insulation. Not really. For 3 years, the bubble curtain went nowhere. Then IBM came out with a 360 computer, which needed to be shipped, which was a big, fragile, expensive machine that could not arrive broken. And someone, the story varies on who exactly had the idea, realized that the bubble sheet could wrap around products and protect them from impact during transit. The air pockets absorbed shock. The texture that nobody wanted on their walls was an engineering solution for freight. Sealed Air Corporation, the company Fielding and Chavan had started, pivoted. Bubble wrap became their product. They built a company that now does billions of dollars a year in revenue. Not because the wallpaper worked, because the packaging worked, because the thing they were trying to do failed, and the thing they accidentally built succeeded at something else. This is almost exactly the story of Post-it notes, which is so well known I'm not going to walk through it again, but the thumbnail version is Spencer Silver invented a weak adhesive at 3M in 1968 that he couldn't find a use for. It sat around for years. A colleague used it to keep bookmarks from falling out of his hymnal, and eventually someone connected the adhesive to the repositionable note concept and built one of the most ubiquitous office products in the world from a failed superglue. Failed adhesive became the thing you use to leave a passive-aggressive note on your roommate's milk. Here's what ties all of these together, and it's the thing I actually want you to sit with. We have a story we tell about how things are made. It goes, someone identifies a problem, someone designs a solution, the solution gets built, people use it. That's the story of intentional design. And it happens, it's real. But the things that actually become woven into daily life, the gestures on your phone, the symbols in your email address, the path cut across the campus lawn, a lot of those went the other way. Something existed, people started using it in ways nobody planned. The use became normal. The normal became standard. The standard became invisible. And then we inherited it as if it had always been that way. There's something almost democratic about it. Not in the people decided idealistic way, but in a raw behavioral sense. The stuff that survived is the stuff that people actually kept doing, regardless of what the manual said. The 30-second button on the microwave exists for a specific technical purpose, but it persists because it fits how people actually use the machine. If it didn't fit, people would have stopped pressing it. and the next microwave design would have dropped it. Function follows use, not the other way around. Which means that when something becomes ubiquitous, when something quietly becomes the way things are done, it's usually not because someone powerful decided so. It's usually because enough people, independently, started doing the same thing, and the path wore down, and now it's a road. The weird corollary to this is that things that are supposed to be used a certain way, but that nobody actually uses that way, tend to quietly disappear. There are keyboards full of keys nobody presses. There are settings menus full of options nobody touches. There are buttons on washing machines that have been there since the 90s because changing the panel costs money, but the real number of people who use the deep fill water level option is zero. The designed thing and the used thing are almost never exactly the same object. There's always drift, always the gap between the intention and the behavior, and the interesting stuff usually lives in that gap. So the next time something works, really works, like it feels frictionless and obvious and like it was always supposed to be this way, it's worth asking whether anyone planned it that way, or whether you're just walking a path that enough people wore down before you that someone finally paved it. Because a lot of what feels like design is just survival. The things that fit how humans actually behave kept getting used. The things that didn't got ignored until they got changed or cut. The microwave doesn't know why you hit the 30-second button. It just runs.